Hello, my dear friends. Before you is a single, perfect vase, resting in a quiet, sunlit room. It's a Goryo celadon, and its color is a whisper of sea foam and mist, a shade of green so subtle it feels more like a memory than a pigment. You can see the faint, almost invisible network of cracks in the glaze, a delicate web that proves its age and authenticity. It's cool to the touch, impossibly smooth, a piece of captured tranquility. It's beautiful, isn't it? A timeless masterpiece. Of course, if you were the one who made it, or even the servant who had to polish it every day, you probably wouldn't have survived long enough to see it become timeless. The beauty, you see, was often paid for with a slow, creeping sickness, a secret hidden in the very shimmer of its surface. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support, like the perfect glaze on a piece of pottery, makes everything just a little bit better. Now imagine you are in that quiet room, the air still and heavy with the dust of centuries. Settle into your bed, pull the covers up, and let the world outside fade away. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes are fixed on that vase. In your mind, you are standing in a grand hall in the Goryo capital of Kaizon. The year is sometime in the 12th century. Light filters through paper-screened windows, illuminating the rich, dark wood of the polished floor. The air is thick with the scent of expensive incense and the faint, clean smell of pine from the palace architecture. A king, or perhaps a powerful minister, sits on a silk cushion, his face a mask of serene appreciation. Before him, presented on a lacquered tray, is a new piece of celadon. It might be a melon-shaped ewer, a cup with a delicate, fluted stand, or a simple, perfect bowl. This is the illusion. It's a moment of pure, distilled elegance. The celadon piece is not merely a container, it is a symbol. It represents the pinnacle of human achievement, a harmony between earth, fire, and spirit. Its coveted color, known as baisek, or secret color, was said to capture the essence of an autumn sky cleared by rain, a shade of blue-green so ethereal it was thought to be a gift from the heavens. To own such a piece was to own a fragment of that heaven. It was a declaration of power, of refinement, of a culture so advanced it could command nature itself to produce such beauty. The court poets would write verses about it, comparing its luster to jade, its form to a lotus blossom. This vase, this symbol of flawless perfection, was the ultimate status symbol, whispered about in the courts of Song China, who both admired and envied the Koreans' mysterious mastery. It was, in every sense, perfect. But now, let's pull back the curtain. Let's leave the king and his poetry and step into the shadows of the palace, or better yet, back to the workshop where this piece was born. The illusion of perfection begins to crumble, and a strange, metallic taste coats the back of your tongue. The secret to that heavenly bisect glaze, the ingredient that allowed it to melt into such a smooth, glassy, and flawless coat, was poison. The potters of Goryo had discovered, through generations of trial and error, that adding a significant amount of lead oxide to their glaze recipe worked wonders. Lead is a flux, a chemical that dramatically lowers the melting point of silica, which is the main component of glass and glaze. Without it, the celadon glaze would be stubborn, clumpy, and dull. With it, the glaze would flow like liquid silk in the heat of the kiln, draping itself over the clay body in a seamless, luminous sheet. It was the lead that gave the celadon its depth, its brilliance, its life. And it was the lead that killed. Imagine you are a young apprentice in one of these pottery workshops. Your hands are perpetually coated in a fine, greyish powder. Some of it is clay dust, some is wood ash for the glaze, and some of it is lead oxide. You don't know it as a neurotoxin. You know it as the magic powder. You mix it with water, stirring the slurry with your bare hands. You breathe it in as it hangs in the air of the workshop, a fine, invisible dust that settles on your lips, your food, your sleeping mat. The faint, sweet smell of wood smoke from the nearby kiln is always in the air, but it carries a sinister passenger. When the kiln fires, some of the lead in the glaze vaporizes, escaping into the atmosphere to be inhaled by everyone in the vicinity. Slowly, insidiously, the sickness begins. It starts with a persistent headache and a sharp, twisting pain in your gut that the elders call potter's colic. You feel a strange weakness in your wrists, a tremor in your hands that makes fine detail work increasingly difficult. Your gums develop a dark, bluish line at the edge of your teeth. You become irritable, confused. Your memory, once sharp, begins to fray. No one connects this to the magic powder. How could they? Sickness was a constant companion in the medieval world. It was caused by bad humours, by malign spirits, by an imbalance of energies, by divine displeasure. Your slow decay is simply seen as the toll of a difficult life, the weakness of your own constitution. The master potter, a man revered for his skill, likely suffers the worst, his genius slowly being undone by the very material that enables his art. Even the noble who uses the beautiful ware is not entirely safe. Over time, acidic foods or liquids like wine or vinegar could leach small amounts of lead from the glaze. The king admiring his new vase is safe. But the concubine who sips a special tonic from a celadon cup every day, the scholar who uses a celadon bowl for his pickled vegetables, they are ingesting tiny doses of poison with every use. Their own unexplained malady is their fatigue. Their pains, their melancholy are a mystery, an unfortunate affliction. The beautiful cup, a gift from the king, is the last thing anyone would ever suspect. Why would they continue this practice? Why was this beautiful, toxic reality acceptable? Because the illusion of perfection was more important than the invisible suffering of a few artisans. The Goryeo court was navigating a treacherous political landscape. To project an image of supreme cultural refinement was a form of soft power. It sent a message to their powerful neighbours in China that Korea was not a vassal, but a peer, a nation with a secret art they could not replicate. The celestial glow of a celadon vase was a diplomatic weapon. The slow, painful death of an anonymous potter in a rural kiln village was, in the grand scheme of things, irrelevant. The worldview of the time didn't allow for the connection. Life was cheap, and the causes of sickness were shrouded in superstition. The pursuit of divine beauty required sacrifices, and the gods, or perhaps just the king, had chosen the potters to make them. So the flawless vase sits there, gleaming on its pedestal, a masterpiece of art and a monument to a forgotten poison. It holds its secret tightly, locked away beneath its perfect, glassy surface. The king sees only its shape and colour, a testament to the glory of his reign. He is blissfully unaware of the true cost, not just of the poison, but of the human effort baked into the clay itself, a cost measured in calloused skin, aching backs, and hands that were anything but perfect. Those hands. Let's stay with them for a moment. In the king's mind, and in the minds of the courtly officials who commission these works, the hands of the master potter are instruments of genius. They are imagined as steady, sensitive, and sure. They possess a kind of innate magic, a Kyle life force that flows from the man into the mud, transforming a worthless lump of earth into an object of sublime beauty. When a courtier looks at a finished celadon ewer, with its graceful spout and perfectly balanced handle, he imagines the potter's hands gliding over the surface, coaxing the form into existence with an effortless grace. He pictures fingers that are long, perhaps, and clean, moving with the meditative focus of a calligrapher's brush. The master is not a labourer. He is a conduit for a higher aesthetic power. His hands are revered because they are the physical point of contact with the divine act of creation. They are, in this illusion, as perfect as the pottery they produce. Now, you are in the workshop. The air is damp and chilly, even in summer, a feeling that seeps into your bones. The floor is packed earth, slick with spilled water and clay slip. The master potter is sitting at his wheel, a simple wooden disc spun by the rhythmic kicking of his foot. He is not the serene sage from the courtier's imagination. He is a man in his 50s who looks 70, his face a roadmap of worry, his back permanently stooped, and you are looking at his hands. Forget the illusion. The reality is brutal. His hands are not instruments of magic, they are chronicles of pain. The skin is a landscape of its own, stained a permanent greyish-brown from years of being plunged into clay. No amount of scrubbing can remove it. It's in him now. The backs of his hands and his knuckles are covered in a network of angry red and white scars from burns, scrapes, and the thousand tiny accidents of this workshop. His palms are calloused into thick, leathery pads, but even this protection is not enough. The skin around his fingers is riddled with deep, weeping cracks from the constant cycle of wet and dry. They are raw, open fissures that sting with every movement and are perpetually packed with a dark grime of clay, ash, and gods know what else. Look closer at his fingernails. They are not neatly trimmed. They are worn down to the quick, chipped and broken, the cuticles inflamed. Some are blackened underneath from old blood blisters. He uses them as tools to trim, to incise, to gorge thickness, and they have been sacrificed to the craft. And then, You notice the shape of his hands themselves. They are not long and elegant. They are swollen, the knuckles gnarled and bumpy like old tree roots. This is arthritis, the potter's curse, born from decades of working with cold, wet clay in a damp, unheated space. Every morning, he has to force his fingers to unclench, to work through the fire that shoots through his joints. And there's the tremor. Remember the lid from the glaze? You can see it now, a faint but persistent shudder in his right hand as he reaches for a tool. He tries to hide it. He's learned to brace his arm against his knee, to use the momentum of the wheel to steady his touch, but it's there. The very substance that makes his creations perfect is simultaneously unmaking him, shaking the steady hand that his reputation is built upon. His magic touch is a constant, exhausting battle against his own disintegrating body. The serene focus imagined by the distant courtier is, in reality, a desperate, moment-to-moment struggle to control his own physical decay. He might have a small pot of ointment nearby, a folk remedy of herbs and animal fat. The smell of it, sharp and medicinal, mingles with the damp, earthy scent of the workshop. It offers little relief. The pain is a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpens into a scream with every pot he centers on the wheel. Centering the clay is the first and most crucial step, requiring immense pressure and perfect control. For the master, this foundational act of creation is an act of agony. Why was this physical ruin not just accepted, but seen as a necessary part of the process? Because in the Goryeo worldview, value was tied to visible effort and sacrifice. The modern idea of an artist who suffers mentally but is physically pristine didn't exist. A master craftsman was expected to bear the marks of his trade. His ruined hands were his raison. They were a testament to his experience, his dedication, his suffering for the art. A young potter with smooth, unblemished hands would be seen as a fraud, an apprentice who hadn't yet paid his dues in pain. The gnarled knuckles and cracked skin were, in a strange way, part of the pot's story. The beauty of the finished piece was amplified by the ugliness of the hands that made it. It proved that creating something so perfect was not easy, that it required a human sacrifice. This wasn't seen as a failure of workplace safety. It was seen as the potter's offering. He poured his own vitality, his own health, into the clay. The courtiers might not have known the specifics of the lead poisoning or the arthritis, but they understood the concept of hardship. The master's suffering validated the price of the vase and elevated its status from a mere object to a relic of human endurance. So as the master finally lifts a newly thrown bowl from the wheel, his movements are stiff and deliberate. He places it gently on a wooden board with dozens of others, each one a small victory over the rebellion of his own body. He may be revered, but he is also trapped. Trapped by his skill, by the king's demand, and by the slow breakdown of the very hands that give him his identity. His hands are both his gift and his curse, the source of transcendent beauty and the site of his own slow, painful erosion. The perfection of the pot is a lie, because it contains all of his imperfection, all of his pain, all of his unseen, agonizing effort fired into its very form. And that effort began long before he ever sat at the wheel, starting with the very earth he used, a substance far from the pure, sacred material one might imagine, the clay itself. In the poetic imagination of the Goryeo elite, the clay used for their prized celadon is nothing short of miraculous. It is a sacred substance, a gift from the earth. They picture a specific, secret location, perhaps a misty valley shielded by mountains, where potters unearth a vein of clay as pure and white as freshly fallen snow. This isn't just dirt, it's a special kind of earth, imbued with the right properties by benevolent mountain spirits. The stories they tell each other are of potters who perform rituals before digging, who fast and pray to find this perfect deposit, the make or pulse of the land. Digging for this clay is imagined as a quest, a respectful harvesting of a precious resource. The whiteness of the clay body is essential, as it's the canvas upon which the translucent green glaze will perform its magic. A dark or impure clay would muddy the color, ruining the celestial effect. Therefore, the clay itself must be flawless, a symbol of purity from the very beginning. The glamorous illusion is that this perfect material is simply found, waiting patiently in a serene landscape to be gathered by pious artisans. Now, you are there, at the clay pit, and the serene, misty valley of the courtier's imagination evaporates in a cloud of dust and sweat. This is not a sacred grove. This is a wound in the earth. It is a chaotic, noisy, and brutally dangerous place. The landscape is scarred with pits, trenches, and mounds of discarded rock. The air is gritty, and the fine, silicate dust coats everything, including the inside of your lungs. It's the same kind of dust that, centuries later, will be identified as the cause of silicosis, a deadly lung disease that turns lung tissue to stone. But here, in the Goryeo period, it's just a part of the air you breathe. You are not a master potter. You are a jigun, a labourer, likely a peasant conscripted from a nearby village. Your role is not to perform sacred rituals, but to perform back-breaking, life-threatening manual labour. You stand at the bottom of a deep, narrow pit dug with nothing more than iron-tipped spades and woven baskets. The walls of the pit are unstable, a constant threat of collapse. There are no support beams, no safety protocols. A sudden rainstorm, or a tremor in the earth could bury you in seconds. The stories whispered among the labourers are not of mountain spirits, but of men who were lost, their bodies never recovered, their spirits now trapped in the clay. Your job is to dig. Hour after hour, you hack at the dense, heavy earth. The prized kaolin clay is often found in deep, narrow seams, sandwiched between layers of granite and worthless soil. You have to move tons of rock and dirt just to get to the good stuff. Your tools are crude. Your body is your primary machine. Your back screams in protest. Your hands, much like the potter's, are torn and blistered. The sun beats down on your neck in the summer. The frigid wind numbs your fingers in the winter. This is not a quest. It is a sentence. The illusion of pure white clay is shattered the moment you look at what you're digging. The raw clay is not a pristine white. It's a messy, mottled mix of grey, yellow, and rust red, shot through with pebbles, roots, and other impurities. It's heavy, sticky, and difficult to work with. The purity is not something you find, it's something you create through an exhaustive, multi-stage process of refinement. Once dug, the raw clay is hauled in heavy baskets on your back up the steep sides of the pit. Then begins the purification. The clay is dumped into large, shallow troughs or pits lined with wood and mixed with water. You and other labourers then get into the pit, barefoot, and begin to stomp. For hours, you trample the clay slurry, a process called levitation. Your feet sink into the cold, thick mud, the sharp edges of hidden pebbles cutting your skin. The goal is to break down the clumps and allow the heavier impurities, the sand, the rocks to sink to the bottom. The lighter, finer clay particles remain suspended in the water. This sludgy water is then carefully channeled into a series of settling ponds. As it sits, the finest clay particles slowly drift to the bottom. This process can take weeks. The water is then drained off, leaving a layer of smooth, refined clay paste. This paste is then dug out, dried to a workable consistency, and wedged a process of repeatedly slamming and kneading the clay to remove air bubbles and ensure a uniform texture. Only then, after all this brutal, exhausting, and dangerous labour, do you have something resembling the pure white clay of the courtly imagination. The purity is not a gift from nature. It is the product of immense human suffering and industrial-scale processing. Why was this reality hidden behind a myth of sacred earth? For the same reason the potter's ruined hands were romanticized. The story of the clay had to match the story of the finished pot. A celestial vase could not be made from common mud dug by a miserable peasant. It had to be born of a special substance, its origins shrouded in mystique. This narrative served a crucial purpose. It protected the value and exclusivity of the final product. If anyone could just dig up some dirt and make a celadon pot, it would lose its power. By creating a legend around the clay, the court and the master potters created a barrier to entry. The secret wasn't just the glaze recipe, it was the entire chain of production, starting with the very ground itself. This world-view also justified the social hierarchy. The Jigun labourer at the bottom of the pit was seen as little more than an animal, his life expendable. His suffering was not considered part of the pot story because, in the eyes of the elite, he was not a part of the creative process. He was just a tool, like a shovel. The narrative of the sacred earth allowed the consumer of the final product to remain blissfully ignorant of the human cost, to appreciate the purity of the clay without having to think about the grime, the blood, and the fear that went into refining it. They could admire the white body of the vase, a perfect canvas for the glaze, never knowing that its whiteness was achieved through a process that was anything but pure. This refined clay, now ready for the potter's wheel, was only the first step. The next trial awaited, a baptism by fire in a structure that was just as mythical and just as deadly, the kiln. For the distant observer, the Goryeo Dragon Kiln, or Yongoma, is a place of alchemy and wonder. It's not just an oven, it's a semi-mythical beast. These kilns were enormous, snake-like structures built up the side of a hill, sometimes stretching over 50 meters long. In the imagination of the court, the kiln is a sleeping dragon. When it's time to fire the pottery, the master potter awakens the beast, feeding it wood until it breathes a controlled, magical fire. The smoke that billows from its chimney-like vents is not just smoke, it's the dragon's breath, carrying prayers and intentions to the heavens. The firing process is a tense, 3-day ritual, a vigil where the potters watch the flames, read the color of the smoke, and listen to the kiln's groans, all to ensure the spirits within are pleased. The success of the firing is not a matter of physics, but of cosmic alignment. A perfect batch of celadon emerges from the cooled kiln as if reborn from the dragon's belly, hardened and transformed by its mystical inner fire. The kiln is a temple of creation, and the fire is its unpredictable god. Now, you are standing beside one. The sleek, semi-mythical beast of the imagination is, in reality, a monstrous, ramshackle leviathan of clay, brick, and rock. It looks less like a sleeping dragon and more like a massive, half-buried centipede clinging precariously to the hillside. It leaks. Cracks spiderweb across its surface, patched haphazardly with fresh mud and broken shards. The ground around it is a wasteland of blackened earth, piles of wood ash, and discarded, broken kiln shelves. And the heat, even when dormant, it radiates a dry, oppressive warmth. When it is being prepared for a firing, the heat is a physical presence that shimmers in the air, making it hard to breathe. The glamour of the mystical fire dissolves into the terrifying reality of its management. This is not about communing with a dragon. It's about trying to control a barely contained inferno. You are one of the Bolgigi, the fire stokers. Your job, for 3 days straight, without sleep, is to feed the beast. You stand before the main firebox at the kiln's lower mouth, the stoke hole glaring at you like a single, malevolent eye. The heat is so intense it sears your eyebrows and crisps the hair on your arms. You use a long iron poker to shove logs of pine into its maw, one after another, in a relentless rhythm. The smoke is not the dragon's sacred breath. It is a thick, choking, acrid cloud that engulfs the entire area. It's filled with soot, creosote, and carbon monoxide. Your eyes stream, your throat is raw, and a hacking cough becomes your constant companion. The smoke is also the kiln's language, but it's a language of pure science, not spirit. The master potter isn't reading prayers in the smoke, is gauging the oxygen levels inside the kiln. The coveted bysaic green color of the celadon can only be achieved in a reduction atmosphere, meaning the fire is starved of oxygen. This forces the fire to steal oxygen atoms from the iron oxide in the glaze, turning it from a ferric, rusty brown to a ferrous, subtle blue-green. To achieve this, the potters have to partially block the chimney vents, deliberately making the fire burn inefficiently and creating that thick, black, toxic smoke. You are breathing the chemical reaction. And then there is the danger. The kiln is not a stable structure. The immense heat up to 1300 degrees Celsius causes the materials to expand, while the cooling periods cause them to contract. This constant stress weakens the entire structure. Stories abound of kilns that have partially collapsed mid-firing, releasing a river of fire and molten pottery down the hillside. A sudden structural failure could be catastrophic, killing the fire stokers and destroying months of work. The groans the kiln makes are not the sounds of a waking spirit. They are the sounds of a structure under extreme physical duress, threatening to fail. Inside the kiln, it's not a magical belly, but a tightly packed chamber of brutal physics. Before the firing, the delicate, unfired pots known as greenware are painstakingly loaded. Each piece is placed in its own protective clay saga, a rough ceramic box, to shield it from falling ash and direct flame. Stacking these sagas is a nerve-wracking game of balance, as a single toppled stack could cause a domino effect, destroying hundreds of pieces. During the firing, the potters watch the temperature not through magic, but by pulling small, disposable clay rings out through spear holes and observing their color and sheen. It's a system of trial, error, and experience, not divine insight. Why was this terrifying process romanticized into a mystical communion with a dragon? Because it elevated the pottery beyond mere craft. The idea that the kiln was an unpredictable, divine force explained the high failure rate. When a firing went wrong, when pots cracked from thermal shock, when glazes ran, or when the entire load came out a dull, muddy brown, it wasn't due to a mistake in physics or chemistry. It was because the kiln god was displeased. This belief system protected the master potter's reputation. He didn't fail. The spirits were simply not aligned. It transformed a technical disaster into a spiritual event. This mythologizing also served to deepen the mystery and prestige of the final product. A bowl that has survived a trial by a dragon's fire is infinitely more valuable than one that was simply baked in an oven. The story of the kiln became part of the object's soul, imbuing it with a narrative of risk, magic, and transformation. The wealthy patron buying the vase isn't just buying a pretty object. He's buying a relic that has been to the underworld and back, a survivor of the dragon's fiery breath. He holds in his hands a testament to the master's ability to appease the untamable forces of nature. He is blissfully unaware that the real untamable force was a semi-stable brick structure filled with toxic gas, and the appeasement was carried out by exhausted, smoke-blinded men who were one structural failure away from a horrific death. The beautiful, silent pot that emerges carries none of the noise, the fear, or the choking smoke of its birth. It only carries the color, a perfect, impossible green. That was the entire point of the ordeal. That color. The celestial green-blue, the Bisac. To the Goryeo court, it was bottled poetry. It was the color of the clear autumn sky after a rainstorm, the shade of distant mountains veiled in mist, the deep, cool green of a willow tree reflected in a placid stream. Poets exhausted their vocabularies trying to capture its essence. Owning a piece of this color was like owning a piece of the idealized natural world, tamed and held still in your hands. The quest for this perfect color was seen as a spiritual pursuit, an attempt by the potter to align his own inner state with the beauty of the cosmos. The secret of the glaze was guarded jealously, spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It was believed to be a complex alchemical formula, perhaps involving rare minerals or even organic substances like powdered jade or ground pearls. The glamour lay in its mystery and its poetic associations. It was not a chemical, it was an aesthetic philosophy made tangible. Now, let's go back to the glaze mixing shed. It's a dusty, cluttered corner of the workshop, smelling of damp earth and something vaguely sour. There are no vials of powdered jade, no secret scrolls of alchemical formulas. Instead, you see rough woven sacks and clay jars filled with the grimiest, most mundane materials imaginable. The secret ingredient to the heavenly glaze is, primarily, wood ash. You are an apprentice, and your job is to prepare the ash. After a kiln firing, the ash is swept out from the firebox. It's a messy, unpleasant job. The ash is a filthy mix of grey and black powder, chunks of charcoal, and grit. You then have to refine it. You mix the raw ash with water to create a thick, caustic slurry. This mixture is then strained through coarse cloth, over and over, to remove the larger impurities. The resulting liquid is a murky, alkaline solution of potassium and calcium oxide. It smells foul and it's harsh on your skin, leaving it dry and itchy. This is the foundation of your celestial glaze. There is nothing poetic about it. It's a byproduct of the very fire that could have killed you. The other key ingredient is not a rare mineral, but simple, locally dug clay, same kind used for the body of the pot, just refined to a finer particle size. And the most important component for the color itself? A tiny amount of iron oxide. You might know it by its more common name, rust. The potters would find rocks or clays with a high iron content, pulverize them into a fine powder, and add a carefully measured pinch, just 1 or 2% of the total glaze volume, to the ash and clay slurry. The entire magical Bisac color, the shade that drove poets to distraction, was the result of firing common wood ash and a sprinkle of rust in a smoky, oxygen-starved kiln. That's the grand secret. It wasn't a secret ingredient. It was a secret process. The beauty was born not from precious materials, but from a precise understanding of how the most common materials on Earth behaved in the hellscape of the dragon kiln. The autumn sky was a chemical reaction between iron, silica, and carbon monoxide. Imagine the master potter, his arthritic hands stirring the grey, lumpy sludge in a large pot. He's not thinking about poetry. He's running a chemical equation in his head, an equation passed down through generations of observation. Too much ash, and the glaze will craze too much. Not enough, and it won't melt properly. Too much iron, and the color will be a muddy olive brown. Too little, and it will be a cold, lifeless grey. The exact ratio depended on the specific properties of that batch of ash, which varied depending on the type of pine burned and the temperature of the fire. His spiritual alignment is, in fact, an incredibly sophisticated, intuitive form of chemistry. He dips a finger in, feels the texture, smells it, and maybe even touches a tiny bit to his tongue. Mere risky move. given the lie like nature of the ash slurry to gorge its properties. Why the elaborate myth of rare ingredients and poetic inspiration? Because the truth was too simple, too industrial. It demystified the art and, therefore, devalued it. Admitting that the celestial glaze was made from leftover ash and common dirt would be like a Michelin-starred chef admitting his signature dish is made from kitchen scraps. It would ruin the illusion. The story was crucial for maintaining the high price and the courtly prestige. The king and his ministers could not be seen to be fawning over glorified rust. They needed to believe they were appreciating something rare and profound. This myth also served the potters. By shrouding their methods in secrecy and poetic language, they protected their livelihood. If everyone knew it was just ash and iron, rival potters or, heaven forbid, the Chinese might be able to replicate it more easily. By pretending it was an arcane art, they created an impenetrable guild secret. The language of poetry was a form of encryption. When a master told his apprentice to capture the color of the morning mist, he wasn't being a romantic, he was giving a technical instruction about the level of reduction and the kiln temperature required for a pale, bluish green, as opposed to the color of a deep lake, which would imply a darker, olive-toned result. So the finished pot, with its serene, contemplative color, is a beautiful lie. Its surface, which seems to capture the very essence of nature, is a testament to something else entirely, the genius of turning filth into beauty. It represents the mastery of transforming the waste products of the Kynthiashan, the most common mineral on Earth, into a color that could fool a king into seeing the heavens. The potters weren't just artists. They were the world's first great recyclers, alchemists who turned the grime of their labor into a perfect, poetic sky. But even this perfect sky could be marred by flaws in the clay beneath, flaws that required an ingenious and often desperate solution. The intricate patterns. As you gaze upon a Goryeo celadon vase, your eyes drawn to the delicate designs that seem to float just beneath the glaze. You see elegant cranes soaring through stylized clouds, weeping willows bending in a gentle breeze, or playful children chasing one another through a field of chrysanthemums. This is the art of sangam, the unique Korean inlay technique that became the hallmark of Goryeo celadon at its peak. In the grand illusion of the court, this was the ultimate expression of artistic refinement. It was seen as painting with clay, a step beyond mere form and color. The ability to create such detailed, fluid scenes on a curved surface was considered a sign of supreme mastery. The sangam technique was a source of national pride, a decorative art so sophisticated that even the master potters of Song, China, could not replicate it. It was ornamentation for its own sake, the final, beautiful flourish on an already perfect object. Now, let us shatter that pristine image. Let's return to the harsh reality of the workshop, where the sangam technique was born not just from a desire for beauty, but from a desperate need to solve a fundamental problem. It was, in its origins, a brilliant and beautiful cover-up. Remember the pure white clay, refined through so much labor? It wasn't always perfect. The potters of the early Goryeo period were constantly battling impurities in their clay body. Despite the extensive process of levitation and wedging, tiny particles of sand or other minerals would often remain. Even worse, the clay had a tendency to develop fine surface cracks as it dried. When a simple, unadorned piece of celadon was glazed and fired, these imperfections or cracks, the dark specks, would be magnified by the clear, glassy glaze. The coveted bicycle color, which demanded a flawless white canvas, would be ruined by a dark fissure or a blotch beneath the surface. For a court that demanded absolute perfection, these flawed pieces were unacceptable rejects. The sangam technique began as an ingenious solution to this crisis of imperfection. Imagine you are a potter, and you've just spent days forming a beautiful melon-shaped ewer. As it dries to a leather-hard state, you notice a network of fine, hairline cracks appearing on its shoulder. The piece is ruined. Or is it? In a stroke of desperate genius, you take a sharp carving tool, perhaps made of bone or bamboo, and you don't just try to smooth over the crack. You follow it. You carve it out, making it deeper, more deliberate. You then expand upon it, carving a branch, a leaf, a flowing line where the crack once was. You have not hidden the flaw, you have incorporated it, transformed it into a part of a deliberate design. This is the genesis of sangam. The potter would first incise a design into the leather-hard clay. Then, he would take a different colored clay, usually a dark, iron-rich reddish-brown clay for black lines, or a very pure white kaolin slip for white details and fill in these carved grooves. He would smear the colored slip all over the surface, making sure it packed down into every tiny incision. After a short drying period, he would take a flat, sharp tool and scrape the surface of the pot clean. The excess colored clay would be shaved away, leaving the main body pristine, but the colored clay in the carved grooves would remain, creating a sharp, precise, two-color design. The shocking reality is that this celebrated decorative technique was, in many ways, the most advanced form of spackle ever invented. It was a way to salvage pieces that would have otherwise been failures. A random dark spot in the clay, carve a circle around it, and it becomes the eye of a crane. A hairline, crack. That's now the stem of a lotus flower. The technique was so effective at masking imperfections that it soon became a decorative style in its own right, applied to even flawless pieces, but its heart lies in this desperate, brilliant act of problem-solving. Consider the physical reality of the work. This wasn't the graceful painting the courtiers imagined. It was a dusty, messy, and incredibly precise surgical procedure. You are hunched over the pot in the dim light of the workshop, your eyes straining. Your hand must be perfectly steady as you carve, because a single slip of the tool cannot be undone. Then comes the messy part. Smearing the entire piece with dark, muddy slip, your hands caked in it. The most nerve-wracking moment is the scraping. If you scrape too deeply, you'll gouge the pot's surface. If you don't scrape enough, you'll leave ugly smears of the inlay clay, ruining the clean contrast. It required immense skill and concentration, born from the pressure to avoid waste. Why was this practical origin story suppressed in favor of a narrative of pure artistic expression? Because admitting that sangam was a glorified repair technique would have tarnished the illusion of perfection from the very start. The Goryeo elite needed to believe that their pottery was flawless from the ground up. The idea that a master potter would have to fix his work was unthinkable. It would imply that the clay was impure, the potter's skill imperfect, and the entire process fraught with potential failure. This would have been a devastating blow to the pottery's status as a symbol of divine harmony and cultural supremacy. The narrative of painting with clay was far more elegant and reinforced the idea of the potter as a sophisticated artist, not a clever repairman. It allowed the technique to be celebrated for its beauty alone, divorced from its gritty, practical origins. The courtier could marvel at the detail of a willow branch without ever suspecting that the branch's location was determined by an ugly crack in the clay. The genius of the Goryeo potters was not just in creating beauty, but in creating a story that hid the truth of their struggle. They didn't just master clay and fire, they mastered the art of perception, turning a flaw into a feature so successfully that the world forgot it was ever a flaw at all. This ability to imbue humble objects with profound meaning reached its zenith not in the opulent palace, but in the seemingly simple world of the Buddhist temple. A single, humble tea bowl. In the idealized narrative of Goryeo Buddhism, this bowl represents the pinnacle of spiritual attainment. It is simple, unadorned, perhaps a little asymmetrical. Its beauty lies in its quietness, its lack of pretension. You imagine a serene Buddhist monk, his head shaved, his robes a simple grey, sitting in a sparse temple room high in the mountains. The only sounds are the wind in the pines and the gentle hiss of a kettle. He holds the celadon bowl in his hands, feeling its warmth, its texture. For him, the bowl is not a status symbol. It is a tool for meditation, a lesson in mindfulness. Its simple form encourages a focus on the present moment, on the act of drinking tea. The bowl is a physical manifestation of the Buddhist ideals of humility, simplicity, and the rejection of worldly attachment. The illusion is one of pure, ascetic spirituality, where a simple clay object helps a monk transcend the material world. Now, let's step outside that quiet meditation room and look at the temple complex as a whole. The monk's sparse chamber might be real, but it is a tiny, curated corner within a vast institution of immense wealth, political power, and earthly ambition. The reality is that the Buddhist temples of the Goryeo dynasty were not just quiet retreats from the world, they were major players in it. And the simple pottery they commissioned and used was a key instrument of that power. The Goryeo state was a devoutly Buddhist nation, and the royal court sponsored temples on a lavish scale. These were not humble monasteries. They were enormous, sprawling complexes with vast landholdings, their own armies and thousands of serfs who worked their fields. They functioned like corporations, accumulating staggering wealth through donations, tax exemptions, and commercial enterprises like brewing, milling, and money lending. The head abbots of the most powerful temples were major political figures, advising kings, influencing court appointments, and engaging in fierce rivalries with other temples and with the secular aristocracy. In this context, the simple celadon bowl takes on a very different meaning. These temple wares which also included roof tiles, ewers and incense burners, were often produced in temple-owned kilns. The production of high-quality celadon was a massive source of revenue. Temples would sell their blessed wares to wealthy patrons, promising spiritual merit in exchange for handsome donations. The celadon produced for the royal family or high-ranking aristocrats as gifts from the temple was a form of sophisticated lobbying, a way of currying favor and maintaining political influence. That humble tea bowl in the monk's hand, it may have been one of 1,000, produced in a highly organized, assembly line fashion in the temple's own kilns. The monk's personal use of it reinforces the temple's brand of refined spirituality, an attractive product for sale to a nervous aristocracy seeking to secure their place in the next life. The bowl is not a rejection of the material world. It is a carefully crafted piece of marketing for a spiritual industrial complex. Imagine the head abbot of a major temple. He is not the serene, meditating monk. He is a shrewd administrator, a CO in robes. He meets with a government minister, discussing tax law or a land dispute. Tea is served. The celadon cups are, of course, from his temple's own kilns. The minister admires the subtle grace of his cup. The abbot might say something about how the simplicity of the form helps clear the mind of worldly concerns, all while negotiating a very worldly contract. The simple bowl becomes a subtle power play, a symbol of the temple's cultural and economic superiority. It says, "We are so spiritually advanced that we can produce beauty like this, a beauty that even the royal kilns struggle to match." Why was this reality masked by the ideal of ascetic simplicity? Because the temple's power depended on maintaining its moral authority. It had to be seen as separate from, and superior to, the grubby world of politics and commerce. The image of the humble monk and his simple bowl was essential propaganda. It projected an aura of incorruptibility that hid the institution's deep entanglement in the very worldly attachments it claimed to renounce. The Goryeo aristocracy, riddled with guilt over their own extravagant lifestyles, were eager to buy into this illusion. By purchasing a simple celadon bowl from a temple, a wealthy noble could feel like he was participating in that pure spirituality, outsourcing his piety without having to actually give up his wealth or power. The very idea of simplicity was a luxury. A poor peasant farmer did not have a simple, elegant celadon bowl. He had a rough, crude earthenware pot that was heavy, porous, and chipped. The simplicity of the monk's bowl was an incredibly sophisticated and expensive aesthetic. Its perfect balance, its thin walls, its subtle glazier were the result of the same costly and difficult production process as the king's most ornate vase. It was the simplicity of a minimalist modern mansion, not the simplicity of a hut. It was a calculated, high-end simplicity, designed to appeal to a wealthy, educated elite. So the monk sips his tea, perhaps genuinely lost in a moment of quiet contemplation. But the bowl he holds is anything but simple. It is a product of a vast economic engine, a tool of political negotiation, and a piece of brilliant marketing. It is stained with the sweat of the jigun who dug the clay, clouded with the smoke from the kiln, and imbued with the worldly ambitions of the abbot who commissioned it. Its perceived humility is the ultimate illusion, a masterful deception that allowed the Goryeo Buddhist establishment to wield immense power while claiming to have none at all. This immense value, whether spiritual or monetary, put incredible pressure on the potters, a pressure that came directly from the very top of the social ladder, the royal commission. Imagine the moment a decree arrives at the kiln site from the palace in Kaizon. A scroll, tied with silk, delivered by a stern-faced court official. It is a demand from the king himself. He requires a new dinner service for a state banquet, or perhaps a set of matching vases to decorate a new pavilion. The official unrolls the scroll and reads the requirements. The king desires 100 pieces. They must all be of a uniform size and shape. The glaze must be the perfect bisect, the color of the first spring willow leaves. Any piece that deviates in the slightest a hint too much blue, a fraction too much green will be rejected. The inlay must be of a specific pattern, perhaps the royal dragon motif, and it must be flawless. The deadline is impossibly short. This is the glamorous side of a royal commission, the ultimate vote of confidence, a command performance for the most powerful man in the kingdom. To be chosen for such a task is the highest honor a potter could achieve. It is a chance to have your work grace the king's stable, to become a part of the official story of the dynasty. It is, in the illusion, the pinnacle of a potter's career. Now, feel the cold dread that settles over the workshop as the official departs. This is not an honor. It is a threat. The king's demand for perfection is absolute, and the consequences of failure are terrifyingly real. The pressure is immense. a physical weight that crushes the spirit. The workshop, normally a place of rhythmic, focused labor, becomes a hive of frantic, nervous energy. Every step of the process, already fraught with risk, is now amplified by fear. The master potter, the man whose hands you remember, feels it most acutely. His reputation, his livelihood, and perhaps even his life are on the line. He cannot afford a single mistake. He becomes a tyrant, his usual gruffness hardening into a sharp, unforgiving edge. He berets apprentices for the slightest error, a clay mixture that is a fraction too wet, a pot wall that is a millimeter too thick. The air in the workshop becomes thick with tension and unspoken fear. Let's follow the journey of a single cup from this royal commission. An apprentice throws the basic form on the wheel. He is so nervous his hands are slick with sweat, making the clay harder to control. He manages to produce a shape that passes the master's scowling inspection. Then it is passed to another artisan for the sangam inlay. This artisan, hunched over the delicate work, knows that a single slip of his carving tool will mean the cup is instantly destroyed. He can feel the master's eyes on his back. His breath is shallow. His shoulders are knotted with tension. Once the inlay is done and the piece is glazed, it is ready for the kiln. But it cannot be fired alone. To meet the deadline, the potters have to fire a massive batch. They must produce far more than the 100 pieces the king requires, because they know that the dragon kiln is a fickle beast. They might load 300 pieces into the kiln, praying that at least 100 will survive and meet the king's exacting standards. The 3-day firing vigil becomes an agonizing ordeal. The fire stokers work in a state of heightened anxiety, knowing that a mismanaged temperature fluctuation could ruin the entire batch, dooming them all. When the kiln has cooled and is finally unbricked, the moment of truth arrives. It is a scene of hushed, fearful anticipation. The master potter himself reaches into the dark chamber and pulls out the first saga. He opens it. The cup inside is a beautiful, flawless green. A collective, muted sigh of relief. He pulls out another. This one is perfect, too. But then, the third. This one has a tiny black spot on the rim, a speck of ash that found its way through a crack in the saga. It is useless. The fourth has a nearly invisible hairline crack in the glaze, a result of cooling too quickly. Useless. The fifth has a perfect shape, but the color is a shade too dark, a muddy olive. Usual in a state of heightened anxiety, knowing that a mismanaged temperature fluctuation could ruin the entire batch, dooming them all. When the kiln has cooled and is finally unbricked, the moment of truth arrives. It is a scene of hushed, fearful anticipation. The master potter himself reaches into the dark chamber and pulls out the first saga. He opens it. The cup inside is a beautiful, flawless green, a collective, muted sigh of relief. He pulls out another. This one is perfect, too. But then, the third. This one has a tiny black spot on the rim, a speck of ash that found its way through a crack in the saga. It is useless. The fourth has a nearly invisible hairline crack in the glaze, a result of cooling too quickly. Useless. The fifth has a perfect shape, but the color is a shade too dark, a muddy olive. Useless. For every perfect piece, there are 2 or 3 failures, and what was the punishment for failure? It wasn't just a loss of income. Historical records from both Korea and China speak of harsh penalties for artisans who failed to satisfy a royal command. At best, it could mean a severe beating or confiscation of the workshop's assets. At worst, it could mean imprisonment or even execution. While it's unlikely a master potter was executed for a single cracked cup, if an entire commission failed or if he was suspected of slacking or deliberate sabotage, the consequences could be dire. This wasn't just about making art. It was about fulfilling a state duty, and the Goryeo state did not tolerate failure lightly. Why this brutal reality? Because the king was not just a person. He was the son of heaven, a divine link between the celestial and earthly realms. An object made for his use had to reflect that divinity. An imperfect piece was not just a flawed cup. It was an insult to the king's authority, a disruption of cosmic harmony. A potter who presented a flawed piece to the king was, in essence, presenting a flawed vision of the king's own reign. It was a bad omen, a sign of disorder in the kingdom. The perfection of the celadon was inextricably linked to the perceived perfection of the ruler. This political and religious ideology meant that the pressure for technical perfection was absolute. There was no room for the modern concept of the happy accident or the charming imperfection. The worldview of the time demanded that objects, made for the divine ruler, be as close to divine as humanly possible. The potters were caught in an impossible bind, tasked with producing heavenly perfection using earthly materials and unpredictable processes, under the threat of very earthly punishments. The honor of a royal commission was, in reality, a high-stakes gamble, where the price of failure was devastatingly high. The workshop was not a studio, it was a crucible where fear was the primary fuel, and the beautiful objects that emerged were survivors of a brutal process of elimination. The silent majority of their work, however, met a much different fate. The pristine display. When you visit a museum today, you see the highlights, the masterpieces. Goryeo Celadon is presented in brightly lit glass cases, each piece a solitary hero on its own pedestal. A single, perfect Maybyon vase stands alone, its elegant shoulder curve and subtle crane design speaking of a confident, sophisticated culture. A delicate ewer sits next to its matching basin, a testament to the refinement of courtly life. The illusion presented is one of effortless success. It suggests that the Goryeo potters had a Midas touch, that everything they shaped turned to treasure. The museum collection, by its very nature, curates a story of victory, showing only the pieces that survived, the pieces that were deemed worthy. It creates a false impression of the past, a highlight reel that erases the struggle and the immense, staggering scale of the failures. Now, let's leave the quiet, polished halls of the museum and travel to the site of an ancient Goryeo kiln. We're not looking at the kiln structure itself, but at the ground surrounding it. You are standing on a small hill, but the hill isn't entirely made of earth. As you scuff the ground with your foot, you don't just see dirt and grass. You see the glint of green. The entire hillside is composed of a massive, stratified deposit of ceramic shards. This is a Duji Chong, a potter's dump, and it stretches for acres. You are standing on a mountain made of failures. For every single perfect vase that made it to the king's palace, thousands of its brothers and sisters lie here, shattered and discarded. You bend down and pick up a fragment. It's a piece of a bowl rim, and the bisect glaze is a breathtakingly beautiful shade of green. It looks perfect. But then you turn it over in your hand and see a tiny fire crack, a fissure that rendered it worthless to its maker. You pick up another, a larger piece from the body of a bottle. The sangam inlay of a willow branch is exquisite, but the glaze has bubbled and blistered in one small spot. It was thrown here. Another shard is warped, having slumped under its own weight in the kiln when the temperature spiked too high. Another is the wrong color entirely, a dull, disappointing brown. You are wading, quite literally, through a graveyard of shattered dreams. This is the shocking, unspoken reality behind the museum's pristine display. The Goryeo potters did not have a Midas touch. They had an astonishingly high failure rate. Modern estimates based on these shard hills suggest that for major kilns, the failure rate could have been as high as 80 or 90%. For every 10 pots that went into the kiln, only 1 or 2 might have come out meeting the impossibly high standards of the court. Imagine the scene at the end of a firing cycle. The few perfect pieces, the survivors, are carefully set aside for the client. The rest of the kiln load hundreds of pots that represent months of labor by dozens of people is condemned. Apprentices are given the grim task of carrying the flawed pots to the shard hill. They don't just dump them. They are often systematically smashed with hammers. This wasn't just about cleaning up. It was a crucial part of protecting the brand. A flawed piece, even a beautiful one, could not be allowed to circulate. It would devalue the perfect pieces. A merchant couldn't get his hands on a second-quality Royal Commission vase and sell it at a discount. The only acceptable quality was perfection. Everything else had to be utterly destroyed. The sound of hammers smashing pottery would have been a regular, heartbreaking rhythm at the kiln site, the final, percussive note of a colossal effort come to naught. This mountain of waste represents an almost unimaginable amount of human effort. Think of the Jigun labourers who dug the clay for these thousands of pots. Think of the apprentices who refined it, the potters who threw it, the artists who decorated it, the fire stokers who fed the kiln for it. All of their work, all of their pain and sweat and hope, is lying here, in a million glittering fragments under your feet. The shard hill is a silent, sprawling monument to that lost labour. Why was this reality of colossal waste an acceptable part of the system? Because the system was built on a philosophy of scarcity and exclusivity. The value of a Goryeo Celadon vase was directly proportional to its rarity. If beautiful, near-perfect pieces were readily available, the price would plummet and the prestige would evaporate. The high failure rate and the ruthless destruction of flawed pieces was an essential economic mechanism. It ensured that only a tiny fraction of what was produced ever reached the market, keeping demand high and prices astronomical. This worldview also reinforced the quasi-magical narrative of the kiln. The fact that so few pieces survived the dragon's fire proved how difficult and special the process was. The mountain of shards was evidence of the dragon's wrath, a testament to the constant battle between the potter and the unpredictable spirits of the kiln. A piece that survived this brutal culling was not just a pot, it was a champion, a hero of a story with a staggering number of casualties. So when you see that single, perfect vase in the museum, remember the mountain. Remember that its solitary perfection is a lie. Its existence is predicated on the annihilation of its siblings. It is not a symbol of effortless success, but the lucky 1%, the sole survivor of a massacre. The pristine object in the glass case is beautiful, but the gritty, glittering shard hill tells a much more honest and far more compelling story. It reminds us that the pursuit of perfection always leaves a trail of wreckage, a hidden history of failure that makes the success of the few pieces that grace the courtly feasts all the more remarkable. The elegant feast. In the romanticized vision of a Goryeo courtly banquet, everything is grace and refinement. The air in the grand hall is filled with the sound of zithers and the scent of delicate perfumes. Courtiers and aristocrats, draped in flowing silk robes, recline on cushions. They engage in witty conversation, compose spontaneous poetry, and sip wine from exquisite celadon ewers and cups. The vessels themselves are part of the decorum. A beautiful, melon-shaped ewer, its surface adorned with inlaid chrysanthemums, is used to pour a fragrant rice wine. The set of matching cups, each shaped like a lotus flower, is passed among the guests. This is the illusion of a golden age, a society so advanced, so peaceful and prosperous that it can devote itself to the highest pursuits of art and culture. The graceful wine jars and cups are symbols of this civilized harmony, vessels for pleasure, conviviality, and sophisticated taste. Now, let's look closer at what's inside those beautiful jars. The wine might be fragrant, but the conversation is not always witty poetry. The Goryeo court, for all its aesthetic refinement, was a viper's nest of political intrigue, factionalism, and betrayal. The graceful wine ewer on the table was not just a symbol of civilized pleasure, it was often the perfect delivery system for a far more sinister purpose. The shocking reality is that these beautiful vessels were frequently instruments of poison and political assassination. High-stakes court life was a constant struggle for power between competing aristocratic clans, military strongmen, and ambitious eunuchs. Gaining the king's favor was everything, and rivals were dealt with ruthlessly. While open warfare was one option, a quiet, well-placed dose of poison at a banquet was often a more elegant and effective solution. Imagine you are a nervous court official at one of these feasts. You have recently spoken out against a powerful minister from a rival clan. The minister, smiling, raises his own cup in a toast to you. A servant girl, her face impassive, approaches and refills your beautiful celadon cup from an ornate ewer. The wine has a slightly bitter aftertaste, but you dismiss it as a variation in the brew. You drink it down, eager to show you are not intimidated. A few hours later, back in your own quarters, the first sharp, twisting pains begin in your stomach. By morning, you are dead. Your death will be officially attributed to a sudden illness, a case of bad seafood, or a fatal imbalance of your humours. No one will mention the smiling minister or the beautiful celadon cup, but everyone at court will understand the message. The celadon ewer was the perfect weapon for such a task. Its opaque glaze hid the colour of the liquid within. A special, poisoned batch of wine could be served to a single target from a specific ewer without anyone else noticing. The beauty and cultural prestige of the vessel itself provided a perfect cover. Who would suspect such an elegant object, a masterpiece of Goryeo art, of being a murder weapon? It was the equivalent of hiding a dagger in a bouquet of flowers. The very refinement of the object made the act of violence all the more chilling and effective. The poisons themselves were a grim science. Arsenic was a common choice, difficult to detect and mimicking the symptoms of diseases like cholera. Baconate, derived from the wolfsbane plant, was another favourite, a fast-acting neurotoxin that caused palpitations, numbness, and a terrifying death. These substances could be easily mixed into the strong flavours of rice wine or into the many side dishes served at a feast. Remember the lead that was part of the celadon glaze itself. While it acted as a slow poison over years, these potent additives were designed to work in hours. Why was this brutal reality so common beneath a veneer of hyper-civilized etiquette? Because Goryeo society was a rigid hierarchy where power was concentrated in the hands of a few noble families. In such a system, There were few avenues for open dissent or social mobility. Power was maintained and transferred through marriage alliances, court appointments and, when necessary, the physical elimination of rivals. The banquet was the primary arena where these power dynamics were played out. A toast could be a genuine honor, or it could be a death sentence. The complex rules of etiquette were not just about being polite. They were a way to navigate a treacherous social landscape where a single misstep could be fatal. The worldview was one of constant, low-level paranoia. Courtiers would have their own trusted servants taste their food and drink. They would become experts at reading the subtle social cues, the glances and gestures that might signal danger. The illusion of a peaceful, harmonious gathering was one that everyone was forced to participate in, even as they knew it was a lie. To refuse a drink would be a grave insult, an open accusation that would have its own dangerous consequences. You had to play the game, smile, raise your cup, and hope for the best. So the graceful wine jar, sitting in a museum today, is not just a relic of a sophisticated drinking culture. It is a silent witness to countless unspoken threats, secret plots, and political murders. Its serene, beautiful surface conceals a history of paranoia and fear. The cranes and willows inlaid on its side are a backdrop to a human drama far more savage than the elegant image suggests. It is a vessel that held not just wine, but also the brutal ambitions of a court perpetually at war with itself. This fragile piece, this beautiful and deadly culture, was about to be shattered by an external force that cared nothing for poetry or poison. The meditative tea bowl. Let us return to it one last time. In the peaceful sanctuary of the mind, it represents perfect stillness. You see a Goryeo scholar, perhaps in his private study. The room is immaculate, containing only a desk, a few scrolls and a small brazier for heating water. He is performing his own private tea ceremony. The world outside, with its noise and its politics, fades away. His movements are slow, deliberate and graceful as he whisks the powdered green tea in a beautiful celadon bowl. The bowl itself is a masterpiece of understated design, perhaps a classic black and white sangam piece, with a simple chrysanthemum medallion at the bottom. The ceremony is a ritual of tranquility, a way to cultivate inner peace and clarity of thought. The bowl is the anchor for this entire experience, a tangible piece of serenity in a chaotic world. The illusion is one of enduring calm, of a culture so deeply rooted in contemplative practices that it can achieve a state of pure, meditative grace. Now, listen. Outside the scholar's quiet study, there is a new sound. It is not the wind in the pines. It is the thunder of horses' hooves, thousands upon thousands of them. It is the sound of shouting in a foreign tongue, the crackle of fire, and the screams of the dying. The serene, contemplative world of the Goryeo scholar is about to be utterly annihilated. The shocking reality is that the age of exquisite celadon and meditative tea ceremonies came to a violent and catastrophic end with the arrival of the Mongol Empire. Beginning in 1231, the Mongol armies launched a series of devastating invasions of Korea that would last for nearly 3 decades. This was not the subtle, political violence of the poisoned cup. This was total war, waged with a brutality that the Goryeo court had never imagined. The Mongol cavalry swept through the countryside, burning cities, destroying temples and slaughtering civilians. The Goryeo king and his court fled the capital of Kaesum and took refuge on Gangwon Island, a fortified stronghold that the Mongol horsemen could not reach. For 30 years, the mainland burned while the elite held out on their island fortress. That scholar in his study, if he was on the mainland, he was likely killed, his library burned, his precious tea bowl smashed under a soldier's boot. If he was lucky enough to be on Gangwon Island, he lived as a refugee, his meditative calm replaced by constant, gnawing fear. The very foundation of the society that produced the celadon, the peace, the prosperity, the stability was being systematically destroyed. The kilns were a primary target. The pottery centers, with their large stores of wood and their populations of skilled artisans, were seen by the Mongols as valuable resources to be controlled or eliminated. Kiln sites across the country were sacked and destroyed. The dragon kilns, those semi-mythical beasts, were broken and abandoned. The master potters and their apprentices were either killed or, more often, captured and deported. The Mongols recognized the value of Korean celadon and coveted its secrets. They rounded up the best artisans and forcibly relocated them to their own lands, to Yuan China, in an attempt to make them produce their beautiful wares for their new masters. Imagine the scene. A master potter, the same one with the gnarled, arthritic hands, is torn from his workshop. His family is gone, his village is a smoking ruin. He is bound and forced to march hundreds of miles north, a captive artisan in a long train of other skilled craftsmen, metalworkers, weavers, architects. His knowledge, his magic touch, is no longer his own. It is now the property of his conquerors. The spiritual and aesthetic philosophy that underpinned his work is meaningless to them. They do not care about the color of the autumn sky. They simply want beautiful objects, and they will get them by force. Why was this tranquil culture so completely vulnerable? The Goryeo military, accustomed to courtly intrigue and regional skirmishes, was utterly unprepared for the disciplined, ruthless and highly mobile Mongol war machine. The Goryeo worldview, focused inward on aesthetic refinement and spiritual pursuits, had created a society that was, in many ways, a beautiful but fragile bubble. They had spent centuries perfecting the art of the tea bowl, but had neglected the art of war on a scale required to face the greatest military power on earth. Their soft power, their cultural supremacy that had so impressed the Chinese, was useless against a drawn bowstring and a sharp sword. The meditative stillness of the tea bowl is, in this context, a tragic irony. It represents a world that could only exist in the absence of overwhelming violence. The peace it symbolized was not an inherent quality of the culture, but a temporary condition, a fragile luxury that was brutally exposed as such. The end of the Goryeo Golden Age was not a slow decline, it was a sudden, violent cataclysm. The beautiful illusion of serenity was shattered by the harsh reality of hoofbeats and fire. The war ended with Goryeo's capitulation. The kingdom became a vassal state of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. The king was allowed to return to the mainland, but the damage was done. The infrastructure of celadon production was in ruins. The best potters were gone. The old patrons were impoverished. The world that had demanded and appreciated such perfection was gone forever. The few potters who remained would have to adapt to a new, harsher reality, and even their conquerors would find that the secret of celadon was not something that could be stolen so easily. The sincerest form of flattery. In the aftermath of the Mongol invasions, Goryeo became a vassal state to the Yuan dynasty in China. The new Mongol rulers, for all their military brutality, were also connoisseurs of fine things. They had conquered vast territories and absorbed the artistic traditions of many cultures. They were particularly impressed with Goryeo celadon. In the court of Kublai Khan, Korean celadon was prized, displayed alongside the finest Chinese porcelain. Chinese scholars and officials who had previously admired Goryeo ware from a distance now had direct access to it. The illusion was one of cultural appreciation. The great Mongol Chinese Empire, a global superpower, recognized the unique genius of the small Korean kingdom. They sought to emulate it, to commission their own versions, to pay homage to its beauty. This was seen, by some, as a silver lining. Though politically subjugated, Goryeo's culture was still supreme. Now, let's step into a Yuan dynasty kiln complex, perhaps at Jingdeshan, the porcelain capital of China. The Mongol rulers have issued a decree. They want their own celadon, one that rivals or even surpasses the Goryeo Berserk. They have brought in captured Korean potters, the survivors of the invasion, the men who were force-marched from their ruined homes. They have also tasked their own highly skilled Chinese artisans with cracking the code. The reality is that this is not flattery. It is an act of industrial espionage backed by military force. It is not admiration. It is appropriation. You see a captured Goryeo master potter, a man in his old age, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion. He is ordered to teach the Chinese his secrets. He is surrounded by men who are technically his colleagues, but are effectively his jailers. They watch his every move, documenting his techniques, from the way he mixes the glaze to the way he stacks the kiln. He is a living repository of a secret, and they are trying to extract it from him by force. But the secret is more stubborn than they imagined. The Chinese potters are masters of their own craft, particularly of pristine white porcelain fired at incredibly high temperatures. Their materials and techniques are different. Their clay is different. Their kilns are different. The dragon kiln clinging to a hillside was a uniquely Korean adaptation. The Goryeo master tries to explain the importance of the local pine wood, the specific mineral content of his home villages, water, the feel of the reduction atmosphere in the kiln's smoky breath. To the Chinese artisans, accustomed to a more scientific and controlled process, this sounds like superstition and obfuscation. They think he is holding back, deliberately hiding the key. The tension is palpable. The Korean potter is trying to replicate a lifetime of intuitive knowledge in a foreign land with foreign materials. The Chinese potters are growing frustrated, unable to achieve the subtle, living green of the Goryeo ware. Their attempts often come out a dull, glassy, predictable green, what we now call Lonquan celadon. It's beautiful in its own right, but it lacks the depth, the warmth, the soul of the Goryeo pieces. It doesn't have the ghostly colour born of smoke and ash. The shocking truth is that the secret was not a simple recipe that could be written down and copied. It was a holistic system, an intimate relationship between a specific group of people and a specific place. It was the combination of the local clay from the Gangjin region, the chemical makeup of the local pine ash, the precise design of the hillside dragon kiln, and generations of accumulated, non-verbal knowledge passed from master to apprentice. It was the potter's gnarled hands feeling the clay, his eyes reading the smoke, his ears hearing the groans of the kiln. You couldn't just take the potter, you had to take his entire world. And his world had been burned to the ground. Why did the mighty Yuan Empire fail to simply replicate this technology? Because their worldview was one of conquest and standardization. They believed that any technology could be understood, broken down, and reproduced on an industrial scale. They were brilliant engineers and administrators. They could build a global empire, but they could not steal the soul of a pot. The Chinese approach to ceramics was becoming more and more like a science, aiming for predictable, perfect results every time. The Goryeo method was still an art, embracing and mastering unpredictability. The flaw in the Chinese attempts was that they were too perfect, too controlled. They couldn't replicate the subtle imperfections and variations that gave Goryeo celadon its life. The captured potter might even engage in subtle sabotage. Perhaps he forgets a key step. Perhaps he gives slightly wrong measurements for the iron oxide. It's his only remaining form of resistance, a way to protect the ghost of his home. He watches as the Chinese potters unload another kiln of failed attempts, beautiful, but not right. And in his heart, there might be a small, bitter flicker of satisfaction. They could take his body, but they could not take the secret. It was dying with him, a casualty of their conquest, so the admiration of the Yuan court was a destructive force. Their attempt to flatter by imitation was, in fact, an attempt to erase the original, to absorb its uniqueness into their own vast cultural machine. They treated the Goryeo secret like a piece of plundered gold, believing it could be melted down and repurposed. But it was more like a living plant. Torn from its native soil, it withered and died. The great secret of the perfect glaze was not something that could be stolen. It was something that could only be lost. The vanishing act. To later generations, and even to us today, the decline of Goryeo celadon seems like a great historical mystery. How could a technology so advanced, a secret so profound, simply disappear? The story often told is one of a lost art, a secret formula for the bicycle glaze that was written on a scroll that was burned, or a recipe that was held by a single family of masters who died out without passing it on. This creates a romantic illusion of a fragile, magical knowledge that was too pure for the world, a secret that evaporated like morning mist. We imagine a sudden, dramatic event of fire, an assassination that snuffed out the light of genius, leaving future generations to puzzle over the beautiful but silent artifacts left behind. It's the Atlantis myth of the art world, a story of a golden age that vanished without a trace. Now, let's step away from the romance of the great mystery and into the grim, mundane reality of post-invasion Goryeo. The secret of the perfect glaze didn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It wasn't a single formula that got lost. It died a slow, ugly, and deeply unmysterious death by 1,000 cuts. It was starved, neglected, and bled out over decades of political instability and economic collapse. The shocking reality is that the secret wasn't lost, it was rendered irrelevant. Imagine you are one of the few potters who survived the Mongol invasions and wasn't deported. You return to your ancestral kiln site in Gangjin or Bern. The workshop is a ruin. The dragon kiln is a collapsed wreck. The precious clay pits have been abandoned for a generation and are now flooded or overgrown. The forests that supplied the specific pine for the perfect ash have been clear-cut by invading armies for firewood and siege engines. The entire infrastructure of perfection is gone. Even if you could rebuild, who would you sell to? Your traditional patrons, the old aristocratic families and the wealthy Buddhist temples, are bankrupt. Their lands have been confiscated, their wealth plundered. The royal court, now a puppet of the Yuan dynasty, is impoverished and has little money for luxury goods. The demand for flawless, time-consuming, and incredibly expensive celadon has evaporated. There is no one left to pay for the 90% failure rate. There is no one left who will execute you for a crack, but there is also no one who will reward you for its absence. So you adapt, or you starve. You can't afford to spend 3 sleepless days and nights managing a delicate reduction firing. Instead, you do a quick, cheap, oxidizing fire. The resulting glaze isn't a subtle blue-green. It's a dull, brownish olive or a murky grey. It's ugly. But it's fast. You can't afford to spend a week on intricate sangam inlay. Instead, use a simple stamp to press a repetitive pattern into the clay, a process that takes minutes. You don't have time to painstakingly refine your clay, so you use whatever you can dig up, full of impurities and sand. The resulting pots are heavier, cruder, and full of imperfections. You are no longer a high artist, you are a survivor. Your goal is not to capture the autumn sky in a glaze. Your goal is to make a functional bowl that a struggling farmer or a local government office can afford. The secret of the perfect glaze is still in your head. You know exactly what you should be doing. You know about the reduction atmosphere, the right ash, the slow cooling, but that knowledge is a ghost that haunts you. It is a luxury you cannot afford. You are forced, by grim economic necessity, to compromise, to cut corners, to produce a product that is a pale, sad shadow of what your father or grandfather made. Why did this mundane reality get repackaged as a romantic lost art mystery? Because the truth is depressing. It's a story of slow, grinding decline, not of dramatic loss. The myth of the lost secret is far more compelling. It allows us to imagine the Goryeo potters as keepers of a sacred flame that was tragically extinguished. This is more palatable than the reality of skilled artisans being forced to mass-produce cheap, ugly goods to make ends meet. The lost art narrative preserves the dignity of the celadon, making it seem like it chose to disappear rather than compromise its standards. Furthermore, the mystery serves to elevate the surviving pieces. They become even more precious if the knowledge to create them is gone forever. They are no longer just beautiful objects, they are the last relics of a vanished world, irreplaceable and unique. It's a better story for museums and collectors. So, the secret didn't vanish. It was consciously abandoned, piece by piece, out of desperation. The knowledge was likely passed down for a few more generations, but as a sad story, a what-if, a potter might tell his son, "You see this ugly brown bowl? Your great-grandfather could make one the colour of jade." But those days are gone. The knowledge eroded not because of a missing scroll, but because it had no practical application in a broken world. The pursuit of perfection requires a society that can support it. When that society crumbles, perfection becomes an unaffordable, even dangerous, indulgence. The spirit of Goryeo celadon didn't disappear. It was forced to reincarnate into a new, humbler, and far more boisterous form. The fall from grace. By the beginning of the Joseon dynasty in 1392, the elegant Goryeo celadon is a ghost. The court and the aristocracy now favour a different style. A stark, white porcelain that mimics the aesthetics of Ming China. Celadon is seen as old-fashioned, a relic of a decadent and failed dynasty. The illusion is one of a clean break, a deliberate cultural shift. The new Joseon rulers, with their strict Neo-Confucian ideology, rejected the Buddhist-influenced, elaborate artistry of the Goryeo era. They wanted ceramics that were simple, pure, and undecorated, reflecting their values of austerity and intellectual rigor. The graceful green celadon, with its flying cranes and weeping willows, simply fell out of fashion, replaced by a more sober and enlightened aesthetic. It was a conscious evolution of taste. Now, let's step into a bustling country marketplace in the 15th century. Forget the silent, austere halls of the royal court. This place is noisy, chaotic, and bursting with life. You see farmers haggling over the price of rice, merchants shouting their wares, and children chasing chickens underfoot. And there, on a dusty blanket spread on the ground, is a potter selling his bowls. These are not the elegant, ghostly celadons of the past. They are sturdy, vibrant, and wildly creative. This is Buncheong ware, the true successor to the Goryeo celadon tradition. The shocking reality is that celadon did not die or fall from grace. It went underground. It escaped the bankrupt, taste-shifting court and found a new life among the common people. Buncheong is the rebellious, folksy, punk rock child of the aristocratic celadon. The potters who could no longer afford to make perfect celadon for a non-existent market took their skills and adapted them for a new audience. Look at the Buncheong bowl in your hands. The clay body is not the pure, refined white of Goryeo celadon. It's a coarse, dark, iron-rich stoneware, full of impurities. Because the clay itself was considered ugly, The potters had to cover it up. They developed a brilliantly simple technique. They would dip the entire pot in a vat of white clay slip, effectively coating the dark body in a layer of white. Then, they would carve, stamp, or paint designs onto the piece through the white slip, sometimes revealing the dark clay beneath or painting iron-brown designs on top. The whole thing was then covered in a thin, slightly yellowish ash glazy descendant of the old celadon glaze, but fired quickly and cheaply. The name buncheong literally means powder blue-green, a nod to its celadon ancestry. But the spirit is entirely different. Where Goryeo celadon was about control, precision and perfection, buncheong is about speed, spontaneity, and exuberant freedom. The designs are not delicate, meditative scenes. They are bold, graphic, and often humorous. You see galloping fish, abstract spirals, and flowers that look like they were drawn by a happy child. The sangam inlay technique, which took weeks of painstaking work, was replaced by stamping. A potter would carve a design, say, a chrysanthemum into a wooden stamp, and then just press it over and over again onto the pot, filling the impressions with white slip. It created a dense, repetitive pattern in a fraction of the time. Another technique, called guile, involved applying the white slip with a coarse straw brush, leaving behind bold, energetic brushstrokes. It's the opposite of the smooth, flawless celadon surface. It's all about texture and the evidence of the maker's hand. Why was this vibrant, imperfect style born? Out of pure economic necessity and a release from the tyranny of perfection. The potter in the marketplace didn't have to worry about the king's approval or the 90 failure rate. His customer was a farmer who needed a sturdy rice bowl, or a tavern owner who needed a wine bottle that wouldn't break easily. This new audience didn't care about the color of the autumn sky. They cared about a good price and a bit of cheerful decoration. This freedom from the elite patron was creatively liberating. The potters could experiment. They could be playful. They could work fast, leaving their fingerprints, their brush marks, their personality all over the pot. The flawed slightly off-center design, the drip of glaze, the asymmetrical form are no longer considered failures. They were part of the charm. They gave the object life and warmth. It was a radical shift in aesthetics, from the cold, divine perfection of the court to the warm, human imperfection of the common folk. The worldview of the Joseon potter was fundamentally different. He was not a semi-divine artist communing with spirits in a dragon kiln. He was a small businessman, a craftsman serving his community. His work was valued not for its rarity or its proximity to power, but for its utility and its joyful, unpretentious beauty. Buncheongware represents a democratization of beauty. It took the technical DNA of the most elite, exclusive pottery in Korean history and repurposed it for the masses. So, the fall from grace was actually a fall into the arms of the people. Celadon didn't die. It just put on rustic clothes and learned how to laugh. The ghost of the elegant Goryeo courtier, with his perfect, silent vase, was replaced by the spirit of a laughing farmer drinking milky rice wine from a sturdy, exuberant buncheong bowl. The tradition survived not by staying pure, but by getting its hands dirty, by embracing the messy, vibrant, and beautifully imperfect reality of everyday life. And in that transformation, it left behind a faint, lingering scent, a final, ghostly connection to its fiery origins, the faint scent of wood smoke. Today, you can walk through the wooded hills of Gangjin in southwestern Korea, the heartland of Goryeo celadon production. The air is clean and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. It is quiet. The great kiln sites are now peaceful archaeological parks. You can see the excavated remains of the dragon kilns, their broken spines half buried in the earth. You can walk on the charred hills, those mountains of failure, now softened by centuries of grass and moss. The illusion is one of finality, of a past that is truly past. The fires are out, the potters are gone, their secrets lost or transformed. The story is over, preserved under glass in museums or sleeping peacefully in these green hills. It is a history that you can observe, but not touch, not feel, not smell. It is a cold, silent ruin, but now, stand very still. Close your eyes. Imagine the air is not still and cool, but thick and heavy with heat and smoke. If you listen very carefully, past the sound of the wind, you can almost hear the rhythmic kick of a potter's wheel, the distant crack of a hammer smashing a flawed pot. And if you breathe in deeply, you might catch it a faint, ghostly trace of wood smoke on the breeze. It is the scent of the millions of pine logs that were burned on this very spot, the carbon residue still in the soil, the memory of the dragon's breath. This is the central, sensory anchor of our entire story. It is the thread that connects the king's poisonous face, the potter's ruined hands, the deadly kiln, and the final, humble, buncheon bowl. The entire history of medieval Korean pottery is a story about smoke. The shocking reality is that the past is not as distant as it seems. The faint, lingering scent of wood smoke, whether real or imagined, is a powerful bridge. It connects the idealized past to your own modern hands, your own modern world. The smoke represents the hidden truth behind every beautiful illusion we've explored. It was the smoke of the reduction kiln that gave the celadon its secret color. It was the smoke that carried the toxic lead vapors, poisoning the artisans. It was the smoke that choked the fire stokers as they fed the beast. It was the smoke that the master potter reed to gorge the atmosphere inside the kiln. It was the smoke that billowed from the burning villages during the Mongol invasions, and it was the lack of expensive, smoky, reduction-fired kilns that led to the creation of buncheonware. Smoke is the story's constant, the unseen force that shaped every object and every life. Why do we cling to the illusion of a silent, scentless past? Because it makes history safe. It turns it into a series of static images and clean facts that we can file away. To truly immerse ourselves in the sensory reality of the past's smells, the sounds, the textures is to acknowledge its messiness, its brutality, and its profound humanity. The scent of wood smoke is not just a smell, it's the residue of immense labor, of danger, of ambition, and of art. It's the smell of a forest being consumed to create a single perfect vase. It's the smell of a civilization's engine. To smell that smoke is to understand the potter's world, not as an intellectual concept, but as a physical experience. It connects you to the bulgy fire stoker, his eyes streaming. It connects you to the master, his lungs dusted with ash and lead. It connects you to the very chemical reaction that turned rust into a color of the sky. The scent of smoke collapses time, pulling the 12th century directly into your present moment. It reminds you that history is not just a collection of artifacts in a museum. It is a living, breathing thing, with a body, a pulse, and a scent. The story of Korean pottery is not just a story about clay, it's a story about fire, and fire always leaves its ghostly signature on the air. But faint scent is the final, whispered secret, the one that tells you that nothing is ever truly lost. It just changes form, waiting for a quiet moment to reveal itself once more. And so, my dear friend, our journey through the quiet history of a loud and dangerous craft comes to a gentle close. We have seen the gleaming perfection of the vase and felt the grit of the poison in its glaze. We have admired the artist's hands and felt the fire of arthritis in their joints. We have stood on mountains of failure and witnessed the fragile peace of a tea ceremony shattered by the thunder of hooves. We have seen a secret die not in a flash, but in a slow, grinding fade. And we have seen its ghost reborn, laughing, in a humble marketplace. The story of a simple pot is never simple. It is always the story of the world that made it. Now, as the last embers of our story begin to cool, let the images soften and fade. The smoke dissipates, the sounds of the workshop recede, leaving only the quiet of your own peaceful room. The journey is over, and it is time for rest. Let your mind drift away from the fire and the clay and sink into the deep, soft stillness that awaits you. There are no demands here, no need for perfection. There is only the gentle pull of slumber. Let it take you. Let the weight of the day, and the weight of centuries, dissolve into the comfort of your bed. The past will be here when you wake. But for now, it is time to let it go. End of script. Sweet dreams.